Hi, my name's Phil Craig. I'm a writer, a TV producer, a lover of stories, and a connoisseur of scandal. And I'm on a mission to bring you the most scandalous tales ever told. So thanks for joining me here at the Scandal Mongers podcast. Welcome once again to me, Phil Craig, to the Australian Bar here in beautiful Strawberry Hill in the southwest suburbs of London, and to the Scandal Mongers podcast. It's been 2 weeks. I'm back from my holidays. I'm no longer in a small, pokey hotel room next to a rather messy bed. I'm back. And yeah, lots to talk about. Oh my goodness, I was going to do a fairly short intro because I've got quite a long interview coming up with Valentine Low, which is the meat and drink of this episode. And I think if you don't know, because some people don't, you can skip forward to that bit. It's quite easy to move the cursor on the timeline. Okay, sounds like I'm talking to children. But a few people have said in recent weeks, I do like your interviews, Phil, but why do you go on and on about stuff? Well, I do go on about stuff. Some people quite like it, even when I show my holiday snaps. But anyway, genuinely, you can skip forward. And if you can't work it out, ask one of your children or your grandchildren. So yes, Valentine's coming up. I was going to do a short intro. Because this is a really good book, and I'm going to tell you actually, I had to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. Now, sometimes as a filmmaker, I've had to do this in the past, never as a podcaster, but Valentine's publishers were quite adamant. So I wanted to see the book in advance, obviously, to prepare for the interview, and also because I'm very curious. You know, Valentine's made some amazing journalistic scoops in recent years about the royal family. Most famously, all the stories about Meghan being a very challenging boss, how there was a sort of Sussex Survivors Club, apparently, from people who'd worked for her, and how all these people, young, idealistic, mostly female, were kind of driven to distraction by the way she ran her life and her office. The reason I say mostly female is that the idea you get if you watch the Netflix series, or maybe if you read Spare, is that the royal family was kind of staffed by all these kind of old, conservative, crusty old men in grey suits. That wasn't the case in Meghan's office at all. But anyway, things unravelled. Valentine Low was the man who really broke that story. And he's back with a really interesting new book about politics and the palace, which is full of scoops, actually. That's why they maybe signed that agreement. You will have seen some of the scoops already because they were in the press. What happens is people tend to place stories a week or so before the book's published. Anyway, I think the book's published today or this weekend. And we're going to talk about it. So yeah, wasn't going to say much, but then Harry turned up in London and it was really significant. And given that we spend a lot of time talking about Harry, Meghan, William and the royals, I thought I'd give you my views on that in a moment and what it might mean. But, of course, comments from last week's episode. Thank you. 2,500 views, not the highest I've had, but also not the lowest. People found Brittany very entertaining with her tales of European royals. If you haven't seen it, do check it out. Brittany from the Royal News Network talking about the scandalous European royals. Narelle Cox 2028 liked it. That was fantastic. Thank you, Phil. Always a pleasure to see and hear Brittany. Well, thank you, Narelle. Ines Mon 6928. She liked my holiday snaps. See, I told you somebody liked them. Ines Mon liked them. I love Wells next to the sea. It's one of the places I visited in North Norfolk. And I loved your conversation with Brittany too. She and Shauna from The Vintage Read are two of my favourite YouTubers. Both stick with facts and eschew conspiracy theories. I would love it if you invite Brittany back again. Well, thank you for that. I think I might do well invite her back. Laurie Prowin? Laurie. Ooh, I don't know. 9232. Thank you for your comment. I love this one. I woke up early this morning and I was about to read a book. And then I saw your new video with Brittany. So I stopped everything, made a big cup of tea, and here we go. Isn't that nice? It's funny for me to sit here in London and think there are people in other places, you know, just sort of waking up or going to bed at different times and listening to my program. It's still a thrill to do that. Anyway, I missed August's comment of the month, as somebody pointed out. And I know you're all desperate to get a mug. Who wouldn't want a desirable Scandalmongers mug? So Rieslin Jones, again, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Rieslin Jones, 5817, have a mug for this lovely comment. This is my fourth viewing of Andrew. This was my interview with Andrew Loney a couple of weeks back about his amazingly successful and important book entitled On Andrew and Fergie. This is my fourth viewing of Andrew. I saw him on the Daily Mail podcast, then with Shauna, and on The Heretic, and now with you, Phil, my two favourite gentlemen. I can't get enough! Exclamation mark. Double exclamation mark. You can't get enough. Well, I'm here every other week. This is spectacular. Thank you so much. Mr. Loney, you're adorable. And I love you too, Phil Craig. Then she says, I assume it's a she, no disrespect to your lovely spouses. I love that. So, Rieslin, no disrespect taken from our lovely spouses. Thank you for that lovely comment and for your support. I've seen you on here before. Really appreciate it. Have a mug. So if you look in the bio of this episode, whether you're listening to it or watching it, you will see an email address for the podcast. Please get in touch, send me your address, and I will send you a mug, which will be, you can be the envy of all your friends. Also, I have a comment that I need to respond to. I need to grovel. I need to grovel to the great state, the great nation of Belgium. Yeah. Helena Nachtigalla, meaning nightingale in English. Helena has been listening to the show for some time and she really likes it, but she did not like last week's show. She wasn't crazy about Brittany and some of the things she said, but I think what really annoyed her is that I made a sort of off-the-cuff remark, trying to be amusing, as occasionally I do, usually a mistake. Trying to be amusing, I said, oh, Belgium, we were talking about the Belgian Royals. Oh, Belgium, it's famous for being boring. I mean, it kind of has that reputation in Britain, I'm sorry to say. Utterly unfair. She said, being a Belgian myself, boring is not something I would call my fellow compatriots. Surreal and absurd sometimes, yes, but certainly not dull. Well, you're quite right. I should not have said it. It was silly. I've known many great Belgian people, and actually, as a journalist, spent some wonderful times working and filming, especially in and around Brussels and Bruges. Had holidays there. For last year, we had a couple of days in the sort of World War I battlefields, the area near Ypres, which was amazing. And we love Belgium. We're sorry for making silly jokes. So, kind regards, she says, from Ghent. I think that's the Flemish-speaking region. I'm not sure I've been to Ghent. Maybe I should. And please keep up your very entertaining podcast. Well, thank you. Thank you for not slamming the door on me. I accept your reprimand and go Belgium. Now, Harry, Meghan, William, what a week. I don't know, when this show goes out on Sunday the 14th, I think a conversation I had with Shauna on the Vintage Read will also be available. This was prompted really by a lot of new developments with Harry, and also stories and suggestions of what he might do next. Where to start? Well, he came to London and then went to Ukraine, looking happy, doing his thing, being nice with kids, being nice with soldiers. You know, I have to say, in the groove of his own old royal role. And as we speculated, and other people have speculated, I think he really misses that. And this may lay behind some of the stories we've been reporting on for months now, that there is an attempt to make some kind of rapprochement. And the famous meeting that was held with one of his people and one of the royal people a few weeks ago, months ago, in a posh London hotel. The suggestion that maybe William and Harry could stand side by side at the Invictus Games. Anyway, he came and he met his dad. For I think 45 minutes, had tea. Harry said it was good. Clearly something is up. This has produced massive amounts of speculation, as you would expect. Some people never want the royals to reconcile with Harry. I understand that. I sympathise with a lot of the criticism of him. But in my sentimental heart of hearts, I would quite like to see them get together and get beyond this if they could one day. That's just me. Not everybody, just me. Tom Sykes from the Daily Beast, he's somebody who crops up in my conversation with Shauna too. Very well informed, sort of Team Harry a little bit. He's writing that the real blockage now is not just William not wanting to reconcile with Harry, but William and Charles being slightly estranged over the role Charles wanting William to do more, William wanting to prioritise private life and health. Well, you'd understand that after what Catherine's been through. But also, of course, William being more angry still about all the things Harry's done and said in recent years, and who could blame him? But maybe one day they can all get beyond that, who knows? But the thing that was really interesting, and this is what prompted my conversation with Shauna, sorry if this is rambling, it does sort of make sense, at least in my mind, is that there's rumours that this Netflix deal that Harry and Meghan have signed, the new one, might well include Harry doing a documentary, another documentary. I was no fan of his Netflix series. I thought, even for people who are a little bit sympathetic to him, it was way over the top, hyper exaggerated, and sort of slanderous, really, about people, but also about Britain, the way it portrayed Britain as a sort of racist hellhole. It was very manipulative, and it didn't represent the country I know at all. But yeah, another documentary, this time about Diana. Yeah, because of course, 2027 anniversary, big anniversary of her death. A lot of interest in that. And Tom Sykes has been writing about that, and he's been suggesting maybe there is something in this Diana was murdered conspiracy theory. That's also what I talked to Shauna about. Personally, I'm very skeptical. I don't think there was a conspiracy. I think the obvious explanation in this case is the correct one. But it's interesting these things are coming out. I mean, if Harry was to make a film that even went there a little bit about him being unhappy at the investigation, thinks there's more that should come out, that'd be sensational. And there's more, because if they don't reconcile, I know a lot of writers in Britain know, a lot of journalists around the Daily Mail especially know, Harry has things in the bank about his mum, about things that were done to her during the height of the battle between her and Charles, the War of the Walesers back in, not only in the 90s when she was alive, but in the years after she died, when material was put out about her that was very damaging by people, I believe, and Harry believes, the Spencer family believes, close to Charles and Camilla. So as to get Camilla maybe more accepted and to make people forget Diana and say, oh, poor Diana, well, she was a bit of a problem, wasn't she? This is dangerous territory. If Harry goes there in a documentary, it would reignite the whole thing. But there's more. Also stories that William has perhaps been talking about doing a documentary. I mean, can you imagine if both brothers make a separate film about their mum, taking different angles perhaps? This could be like supercharge the whole rivalry again. I mean, William, I don't think William would ever do it on the BBC. He's still furious about the Bashir interview, rightly so. But a lot of other broadcasters would love William to make a film. Then Harry might make a film, and the whole thing keeps going on, and I just don't know, really. If you watch my Shauna interview, I think there are many dark secrets still about royal spin and the relationship between the royals and the tabloid hacks of Britain at their worst, in the era when they were at their worst, and the papers that were the worst, the particular paper, News of the World. I think a lot of that still hasn't come out. And I know other people who were close to Diana, like Patrick Jeffson, her former private secretary, feels that too. And if you want to know more about that, you can watch the very early episodes of our show and talk to Patrick about his continuing anger about the way that was handled. So yeah, so what to make of all this talk of reconciliation, but suggestions that there might be bubbling away another round in all this. And again, it features Diana. And I do think actually that a lot of the stories of Diana, her life, and especially now maybe her death, people are coming to them in a new way. They're coming to them as a proxy for the battle between William and Harry. So if you're favourable to Harry, you might take a particular view of Diana and vice versa. I think it's a shame. I mean, it's a different era, it's a different story, different characters. Obviously a story that I'm really interested in. I've written about, made programmes about Diana, have some strong feelings about all of that, which I do share with Shauna in a longer form if you're interested. Anyway, lots happening, lots bubbling. This story just seems to keep going on and on and on and getting ever more complicated. So that's that. Now, Valentine, his new book. It's not just about the current royals. I mean, the scoops that you may have seen were about the Queen primarily, but also Camilla, a great story about Camilla. Oh, I'll tell you, because I'm sure you know, story of Camilla when she was a teenage girl being harassed, abused, somebody trying to kind of grope her on a train. and she took off her shoe and slammed him in the groin with the shoe. Good on you, Camilla. That's probably one of the best stories that's been told about it. And everybody was going, yes, go for it, sister. So that was a scoop in Valentine's book. But there's much more. It's not just about the modern royals. It's the story of the power and politics, global and British politics, and the royal family, and the various characters of the various monarchs, how they interacted with politics. Anyway, I think that's quite enough for me. Thank you for listening. As I say, if you don't like these rambling introductions, you can always skip to the meat, the sort of the main course, shall I say, of the episode, which is now about to start. So put on your napkins, get your knives and forks out. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you at the end. Thank you very much. Bye. Valentine, you're the first person who's made me sign an NDA.
That's because I'm very important and very secret.
Actually, I should say it wasn't Valentine who made me sign it. It was his army of agents, his personal security, paramilitary support. No, it made it all the sexier to read your book, which I did before it even got in the papers. I felt
It's how we draw up a spurious sense of excitement.
well. I must try it myself in the future. Well, no, I don't know about the NDA, but wow, you've been everywhere. I mean, the stories from the book, especially about the Queen, the late Queen, have been everywhere. You must be very excited.
I mean, it has been fantastic. I did think that it would get a certain amount of traction. I don't think I anticipated quite how much.
Well, it must have been nice not to write about Meghan and Harry for once.
Huge relief, fantastic. I'm so overjoyed. But the curious thing about it was this sense of sitting on two scoops, so Camilla and the Remainer one, for more than a year. I mean, it puts the stresses of Sunday newspaper journalism into the shade. I thought the Camilla story would probably be safe. I was a little more worried about the Queen being a Remainer. I thought that could possibly come out.
Well, all of us were very good with our NDAs, and
Yeah.
I will get to the Queen, of course, because it is, obviously the most talked about part of the book. But I really enjoyed the earlier stuff, your sort of trip through constitutional history with lots of lovely, delicious gossip. I really enjoyed that. I'd like to talk you through some of that because it is actually a kind of alternative history of Britain through a very unique perspective, the monarch.
Yes, and it is fascinating. I mean, because the reason I did it is because I didn't understand it. I had, I think I'd watched that ITV series about the Daisy Goodwin show about the young Victoria a few years back. I'd also read a biography of Victoria. And there's all this discussion about the various sort of things that went on, her relationship with her prime ministers and the famous bedchamber crisis, which we may or may not touch upon. And I thought, how did you get from there to here being basically Queen Elizabeth II, who just went out of her way to be above politics, not to choose prime ministers, not to interfere with ministers, because no one wrote a new rule book in the intervening century and a bit. No one said, okay, we used to do this, but we will no longer, and said we'll do that. And I'm just interested in how this sort of kind of nebulous transition happened and what happened and where we've been and where we've got to.
Well, you start with William the Fourth, I guess the first king to have the first monarch to have a prime minister. And you then, of course, his niece, Victoria, who's rather perhaps more important and interesting. But William the Fourth, you say, there's a sort of bookend because, like Charles, he starts his reign with a display of temper over a pen.
I know, it's a fantastic coincidence, that, isn't it?
If I'd have come across that, I'd have thought, right, I'm home free now. My books would have been wonderful. Great piece of
but of course, there's a sort of, so that's the amusing reason to start with William IV. The serious constitutional reason and the real reason I wanted to mention him was that he was the last monarch to dismiss a prime minister who had the support of the House of Commons. And what amazing thing is he could have got away with it, and people might have thought it was a foolish thing at the time. Yeah.
So Victoria comes to power, and I love the portrait you have of her as a rather kind of capricious slightly meddling queen, which is obviously not the way that she's remembered from her later years. And she engages quite enthusiastically in all kinds of political intrigue, really from the first weeks of her reign.
But the fantastic thing is she starts off her reign with the Privy Council saying she's going to be a good constitutional queen, which is kind of ironic given the way things unfolded. But so her first prime minister is Lord Melbourne, who she absolutely adored, or she secretly in love with him. I think it was more of she looked at him as a father figure, but they had a very close relationship, and he of course was a Whig, and so she starts off being a Whig. And in one election fairly soon, early on in her reign, she actually gives money to the Whigs to help them fight their electoral campaign. And later, Albert finds out about this, and he thinks it's a terribly bad idea.
Actually, there's a theme in your book that so many of these monarchs often are more comfortable socially, maybe even politically, with the left, which you might expect all to be kind of total conservatives, but that often isn't the case, especially with Victoria.
Yeah, yes. She of course, goes on a political journey. She starts off by being a Whig, ends up being a Tory. But the thing about the left is fascinating. So if one goes forward to sort of George V had sort of close relationships with some people of the left. He was very accommodating to the first Labour government. He went out of his way. George VI got on very well with Ernest Bevin. It's fascinating. But going back to Victoria, she what didn't she get up to? She tried to influence who the prime minister was, the choice of prime minister. She went out of her way to avoid Lord Palmerston, who she couldn't stand being prime minister. She went to several other candidates before very reluctantly settling on him. She tried to sack Palmerston as foreign secretary. She was she was just awful towards Gladstone and lovely towards
actually one of the lots of delicious bits of gossip, and maybe gossip's the wrong word in this case, about famous figures from the past. I had no idea until I read your book that Palmerston had this massive sexual scandal, I mean, abuse scandal, really, hanging over him. That earlier in his life, he'd been kind of caught trying to break into some woman's bedroom.
Yes, and this was, if I remember correctly, this was at Windsor Castle, wasn't it? I think basically it was an attempted rape. Not to put too fine a point on it.
Or maybe it's not a surprise Victoria was rather wary of him.
Yeah. And his nickname was Cupid, for his fondness for the opposite sex. And this was, when Victoria and Albert were sort of hating Palmerston, they dredged up this scandal from a few years earlier and tried to get rid of him on that basis. It failed.
You mean royal spin in the 19th century? Nothing changes.
I mean, their attempt failed because the prime minister at the time thought it was all a long time in the past, and we should perhaps overlook these things. I think that was an attitude which wouldn't pass muster these days. But extraordinary times.
So, I mean, as I say, I have so much I could talk to you about. I don't have you for forever. The other king I thought that you really liked, and I really liked rather more from reading your book, was George V. I mean, we're rushing forward a bit now, but we think that the Queen Elizabeth, had to deal with change during her reign. But my God, George V, I mean, think of what happens in his lifetime. And even just in his relatively brief time as king.
I mean, George V is extraordinary, as well as the First World War.
The First World War, half of his relatives getting executed or thrown out of office. Women, like an entire half the population, get the vote, and you have socialists in power. I mean, crikey.
And you have the whole Home Rule thing, Ireland, which was a massive thing, which he tries to help solve. He his contributions don't, in the end, have much influence. But it was an attempt to, he didn't think he should get involved in politics, but there were times when he thought there was an impasse and he should try and act as an honest broker. So in a way, he represents a sort of halfway house between the meddling of Victoria and the kind of unmeddling of Queen Elizabeth II.
Well, I think that was actually you said earlier that he got on rather well with these socialists, and Ramsay MacDonald, the first Labour Prime Minister, for example. And maybe that's a sign of how, those who defend the monarchy sort of show how it kind of helps to ease change, sort of, I don't know, lubricates the kind of machine of history a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there was some advisor, I can't remember which advisor to the monarchy it was, who reckons that the monarchy should not be ahead of times, ahead of public opinion. They shouldn't even be keeping up. They should be just one step behind, which is which is kind of interesting.
So that is interesting, actually. I mean, we're jumping around here, but you think of William and Harry, and we'll get to them maybe more later. But
Yeah,
William is clearly the way he dresses, the way he conducts himself, a little bit conservative. He's just maybe 10, 15 years behind the times.
yeah,
Harry is out there with the zeitgeist, all the causes, campaigning wife.
yeah.
Do we want a trendy, lefty, greeny royal, or do we want them to be kind of slightly fusty, but capable of changing a little bit?
I think,
I'm thinking of Diana at Live Aid, jigging around with, going with the times. Everybody thought that was wonderful, but I bet at the palace they were all cringing.
yeah, and of course, there are an awful lot of people who are of a conservative bent who would have slightly cringed at that. Not just the palace. You've got to remember, it's not just us in the metropolitan elite, Phil, who have to be pandered to. It's everyone else who perhaps adheres to more traditional values.
All right, well,
And
let's get to the Queen Elizabeth II, because you've got some amazing stories. And I don't just going back to the beginning of her time, dealing with Prime Churchill, when she's really very young, and they seem to have almost like a sort of platonic love affair, don't they?
yeah, I mean, Churchill, I think, basically in love with her. I mean, there's no two ways about it. He adored her, and she revered him. I mean, but I think she could find him exasperating. I think there were times when she thought he didn't listen, and which is a kind of a common theme throughout the Queen's reign. She would say of prime ministers, they just, like all prime ministers, they just don't listen.
There's a lovely story which I think was memorably brought to life in The Crown of her dancing at a Commonwealth summit, and she was called the Socialist Queen of the
It
World.
was it was a state visit to Ghana.
Ghana at a time of real kind of delicacy over the sort of end of empire and how can we counter the Russians and the Soviets in the kind of developing world. And
Yeah.
this is maybe one of the best stories of her reign.
Yeah, and it was made so Ghana, recently independent, flirting with the Soviet Union. It was quite important, and she'd already postponed the visit because of pregnancy. So this was the rescheduled one. And then shortly before the visit, kind of bombs were going off in the capital, and there was a question about whether she should still go, and it was definitely decided she should. Um, and It was a fantastic visit, and as you say, picture of her dancing with the president of Ghana, and
I mean, that sent a massive message.
it did send a massive, yeah,
Independent leader dancing with the Queen of the empire that his country had kind of escaped from or evolved from, whatever word you want to use.
and the Prime Minister Harold Macmillan was trying to get the Americans to invest in a great infrastructure project, a dam, and he told Kennedy, I have risked my queen. You must now risk your money.
Well, that's interesting. Was it something the Queen decided to do, or was she pushed into it by Macmillan, do you think? Or both?
I think the Queen was always in favour of going to these things. She put her own safety and security to one side, and if she thought something was worth going to, she should go. I mean, there's one of my favorite stories in the book is from sort of 20 years later when she's due to visit Jordan in the early to mid 80s, I think 83 or 84, and there are security worries. Again, bombs going off, and literally the day before she's due to go, there's a question mark whether whether she should. And they have a little summit down at Chequers. So Margaret Thatcher's prime minister, and Lord Luce, well, he wasn't Lord Luce then. Richard Luce was the minister from the Foreign Office in charge of the Middle East, who had sort of engineered the visit. He thought she should go. And Michael Heseltine, the Defence Secretary, and Geoffrey Howe, the Foreign Secretary, thought she shouldn't. So those two, and Luce and Margaret Thatcher, are thrashing it out at Chequers. Thatcher isn't quite sure what to think, and eventually says, "Well, we should get the one person into the room who really understands the man in the street, Dennis." So Dennis Thatcher is summoned and given a large whiskey and explained the situation. And he thinks about it for a while and then says very slowly, "Well, Queen Elizabeth I would have gone, so Queen Elizabeth II should go."
Brilliant story. That has the ring of truth about it. I can absolutely imagine that happening. But often she's done things that must have been quite difficult for her. Meeting Martin McGuinness, which was a big moment in the peace process and in Ireland. And this is a man who probably or maybe gave the order to blow up Lord Mountbatten, or was part of the organisation that did it. I mean, talk about letting bygones be bygones. That's quite a moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there are parallels going back to George V. There are parallels with the Soviet Union when the Soviet ambassador was invited to Buckingham Palace. George V said, he didn't want this to happen, this under the first Labour government. And secondly, if he did, he was not going to shake his hands in public. And eventually they settled on a compromise where he shook his hands in private. So the ambassador was welcome to the palace, but any handshakes were in private.
Well, again,
only a few years earlier, they'd murdered his family.
Well, absolutely, and they'd murdered horribly his family, and that's extraordinary, isn't it? But I guess you have to have a very thick skin if you're going to represent a nation on the basis of, accident of birth.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, a story that I always remember, I mean, I don't know if it's in your book, actually. If it is, I apologise. I might have skimmed that bit. But there's a famous story of the Queen. We talked earlier about how they can kind of smooth change, going to one of these Commonwealth conferences and being late for a dinner and turning up and apologising. And one of the new Commonwealth Prime Ministers said, "That's okay, Ma'am. At least 6 of us have waited at your pleasure before." Meaning they've been imprisoned for their kind of radical activities. That's
I don't know
that can happen, isn't it? It's probably apocryphal. That's why you didn't put it in.
I'm sure it's apocryphal because the Queen was never late. What on earth are you talking about?
Fair point. Fair point. I would never have got past the editor of the Times with that kind of sloppy approach to journalism. There are loads of stories about the Queen like that. I loved her relationship with Blair. You really nailed that, I think. I mean, is it true that he said to call me Tony?
Oh no, that's with Charles.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
He said that it's Charles who's called me Tony. Yeah. So nice to see you, Prime Minister.
Yes. But that's right. I think we want them stuffy, a little bit stuffy. It wouldn't be great to have a totally right-on monarch.
I mean, but it's very interesting, Charles's relationship with politicians. So he wrote to Blair when he wrote him. He obviously, I think he sort of got on with Blair to an extent, but he wrote "Dear Prime Minister." But there were other politicians, other ministers, who wrote to by the first name.
Really?
And it's not entirely clear who gets first name terms and who doesn't.
I liked your account of it's an often told story of Diana's death and the funeral, and it's usually told, partly because Alistair Campbell has spun it like this, that Labour saved the monarchy with all this great advice about the funeral and the way you tell it, actually, it was a lot of the innovations and the breaks from tradition came from the palace itself.
I think that's definitely true. The palace was reacting quite quickly to changing times, and they did realize that a different kind of funeral would have to be held. But there's a very telling reference in Alistair Campbell's diaries when basically he says, we're 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 trying very hard to put across the message that, or to avoid the message going out that we're, butting in, we're telling them what to do, we're intruding. And he then has an aside. I can't remember exactly what the aside is, but basically says, which is more or less true. um, yeah.
No, it's how you. I mean, you talk a lot about Charles. Obviously, you do because he's the current monarch, and how he's kind of trying to deal with a very difficult situation in the world.
Yeah.
And of course, you've got quite a lot of because you must have finished it fairly recently about Trump. Perhaps that's another example of the head of state doing something that might not be to their taste, but is
Yes,
for the
definitely,
good of the
definitely.
country.
It's for the good of the country, and it's glaringly obvious because we know what Charles thinks about things that, he and Trump do not see eye to eye in the environment. But, Charles has made a conscious decision to be helpful to Keir Starmer. Well, to whichever prime minister it is, it's Keir Starmer now. And I think he's got quite a lot in common with Keir Starmer. I think they've got a sort of earnestness in common and a desire to sort of get things done. And he, if Starmer wants to invite Trump for a second state visit, absolutely extraordinary, almost unprecedented thing. Yes, Charles will go along with that, and Charles will be on his best behavior and he and William will, because William will be on hand as well. He will make Donald Trump feel very welcome. He's, and
What did the Queen think of Trump really, or did she never say to anybody?
um, Can we pause that question because I can't remember? I can't remember. Robert Hardman covered this in his,
Okay, not a problem. I
and
respect
I can't remember what Robert said. I try to ignore what Robert says most of the time.
No, well, I can understand that. Well, let's talk a little bit about, because to bring it up to date, excuse me, bring it up to date. I think one of the things that's discounted in all the conversations about William and Harry is that, of course, Harry married somebody who is quite an active political figure, has loud opinions about the world, and has
Yeah,
been happy to associate herself with a particular party, the Democratic Party.
yeah,
That in itself is perhaps one reason why someone a bit more conservative, like William, would be wary, do you think?
yeah. I mean, can you imagine a world in which Meghan is within the fold but still expressing political opinions? I think William would find that awkward and unhelpful. I mean, let's have a think about this. Kate's political opinions, any idea what they are? Me neither. Uh, William's political opinions, me neither. Um,
It's in some ways, William is more careful about this stuff than his father was.
yeah, I mean, William's definitely more careful about this sort of stuff than his father was. And you see that when he launched his homelessness initiative a small number of years ago, he went out of his way to check that it was okay with ministers. He wanted to make sure he wasn't treading on any political toes. Uh, he's very careful. He knows what his job is. And going back all over the well-trodden ground of Charles, it's quite shocking to remember, to be reminded about, basically how meddlesome he was. It's not so much the letters, because in a way they were sort of harmless.
There were
But
so
he,
many of them.
sorry,
But there were so many of them.
there were so many of them, and of course, the ones that the Guardian uncovered, they're only over something like a 6-month period. So
These were the famous, for people who don't know, Charles wrote these, what they call spider letters, because his
they
hand.
were called Black Spider memos. I mean, which is very misleading because they were not memos, they were letters, and they were not Black Spider because they were almost invariably typed and he hasn't really got spidery writing. But apart from that, everything's accurate.
Thank you, Guardian.
I don't think the Guardian's to blame on that one. But Charles would have these clashes with ministers, and I think there was one minister where Charles had to show a speech to this minister before making it, and the minister asked him to take out a couple of lines. And Charles basically said, "Do you know what? I'm not going to." And he definitely had clashes with Ken Clarke. He definitely annoyed Ken Clarke on occasion, and he annoyed the Blair government. But Charles always used to say that he would change, he'd do things differently when he was king because he knows the difference between Prince of Wales and being king, which raises the question: well, what is the difference, and how do you define it, and who lays down?
Well, you quote Lloyd George. I remember now in your book. It's a great moment when you say Lloyd George had said, if a Prince of Wales wants to be a constitutional king, he should start by being a constitutional Prince of Wales.
Exactly. And it eventually dawned on me that no one defines the difference. No one lays down what the difference is. And all this behavior on Charles's part was just Charles basically making the rules himself. And to a large extent, he gets away with it. And I just think there's this very significant moment when he writes an article for the Daily Mail about genetically modified food. It goes down very badly with the Blair government. And the Blair government doesn't pick a fight with him in public, but they get Peter Mandelson, who has a relationship with Charles, to ring Charles up. And Mandelson tells this in his memoirs, but no one's paid attention to it. Mandelson rings him up from a traffic jam in Manhattan and basically conveys this view. And I just think it's the first time that we know about, there may have been others, but the first time we know about where the government said, no, mate, you have crossed the constitutional boundary here. You've gone too far and you've got to back off. And I think it's a very, very significant moment.
How interesting. All right, let's get to I'm jumping about a bit because my plans for the structure of this conversation have just totally evaporated. It's because I'm enjoying it. Maybe the most direct political act that you've put to Elizabeth, to Queen Elizabeth, was the Scottish referendum. For those who don't know, there was a referendum about whether Scotland should remain in the United Kingdom, and it was quite close. So I'd love you to tell that story for people who haven't read the book.
So during the Scottish referendum, shortly before the referendum, there's a disastrous opinion poll in the Sunday Times. So Cameron, who was, wanted to keep the union with Scotland, thinks they're going to win, and then this opinion poll comes showing that it's actually neck and neck, and he suddenly gets worried that they're going to lose. And in fact, he's up when that Sunday Times drops is published. He's actually at Balmoral, yeah. and he has to put on a brave face in front of all these sort of ladies in waiting. No, it's just a rogue poll, but actually he's seriously very worried indeed. And he gets the palace. He talks about this in a television interview, I think. He just thinks the raising of an eyebrow, just a quarter of an inch, might help. And his private secretary, Cameron's private secretary, and the Queen's private secretary, they sort of, and the cabinet secretary, anyway, the government and the palace, they cook up something. They cook up, and what happens is that Church, the Crathy Kirk by Balmoral, the Queen goes to church, and when she comes out, she talks to people, and someone asks her something about the referendum, and she says, well, I just hope that people will think very carefully. It's a very clever construction, because she's not telling people how to vote, but she's giving quite a clear signal about what she thinks. And
now, that was a divisive.
At the time, the palace, no, nothing to see here. But of course, they were lying through their teeth. There was everything to see there.
You've uncovered how it was all stitched up and arranged, which is
exactly. It was all stitched up. And also, I've since learned other details, which unfortunately I'm not able to share because of the sources, but which make it you know, beyond any doubt whatsoever that it was a carefully thought out plan to deliver this subtle
Okay, so
message.
here is the Queen injecting herself into an extremely divisive. I mean, in Scotland, people were at each other's throats. It was very bitter,
Yeah.
that campaign. And if you're Nicola Sturgeon or a member of the Scottish Nationalist Party, National Party, you're furious. They must have been
Yes.
livid.
They were livid, but of course, hard to criticize the Queen, and particularly when it's so cleverly worded because she hadn't said anything. What has she said? Just think carefully. But this would come to bite them a little later. So during the Brexit referendum, uh, when the Sun has a headline saying Queen backs Brexit, which was based on a conversation at lunch at Windsor Castle in 2011, I think, where she had expressed views about the EU. She said, "I don't understand the EU," and this becomes in the prism of the Sun, Queen backs Brexit, and they the palace felt sort of hamstrung. They felt they couldn't really respond strongly because of everything what had happened in the Scottish referendum.
Oh, I see.
Some people in the palace thought it had been a mistake. They thought it was creating a precedent, an ill-advised precedent.
So what did the Queen say anything or let it be known at all what she felt? And how did you find out that she was actually hoping to stay in the EU?
Well, I spoke to a minister who will remain nameless, who told me that during the referendum, about 3 months before the actual referendum, this minister had a conversation with the Queen in which she said, "I don't think we should leave the EU." And she went on to say that basically better stick to the devil you know. Now, it's important not to overclaim here. I mean, I think she was a reluctant Remainer. I mean, I think she did have some skepticism about the EU. She was exasperated by the bureaucracy. Not that she probably had to suffer the bureaucracy much herself. She wasn't importing widgets from Brussels, but I think she was aware. She spoke to people. She was aware of it. So I think she had a certain amount of frustration with the EU, as an awful lot of people did. But I didn't think she wanted the tumult and disruption of leaving. And because what's interesting, so this conversation gets back to David Cameron, who has to think about, do I use this? Because, there's no doubt it could have had an effect on the campaign. It was 52-48 in favor of leaving. Well, that might have swung it the other way. Who knows? I mean, one of the great imponderables of history. But he decides, I think probably quite rightly, not to use it because you shouldn't betray a private conversation with the Queen for any reason whatsoever, but certainly not for your own political purposes. The Queen, I'm sure, would have been furious. But
Did you get any? Have you had any feedback from your friends at the palace about the book, especially about the Remainer story? Or is it too early because it hasn't actually been published as we're speaking?
there's been a certain amount of briefing from the palace. So, I think other journalists have been told, oh, well, the Queen, she never gave anything away politically. She never revealed opinions. People might have interpreted conversations in the way that they would like to see them. And I just think that is absolute nonsense. Come off it. Pull the other one, guys. This was a conversation where the Queen said something quite clear, not something that needs interpreting. She said what she thought, and it was repeated to me by the only other person in the room. So,
Mr. Low, recollections can vary, as you know. All right, I'll save the best till last. Camilla. This is the best story about Camilla for a long time. They must be thrilled to have it out here. Camilla is kind of feminist action figure avenger. I mean, wow, what a great story. I need to know everything. How did you find out, insofar as you can say? And is she pleased? Is she pleased that the world knows that she kicks men in the balls?
How I found out, it was a complete surprise. I wasn't anticipating finding out anything like this. I wanted to delve into Boris Johnson's relationship with the royal family because that's interesting. It raises its head when Boris had a row with Charles, Prince Charles as he was then, about the Rwanda policy, and it surfaces again when Boris prorogues Parliament and embarrasses the Queen because it gets overturned by the Supreme Court. So Boris Johnson's relationship with the royal family is an interesting thread. So I was exploring this, and I can say how I found out because it's on the record. They spoke on the record. I spoke to Guido Harry, who had done the comms, the PR for Boris when he was mayor of London, and also had a stint doing that when he was prime minister. But this relates to when he was mayor, and so I was interviewing Guido, and he told me about a first encounter between Boris and Prince Charles. Boris is newly elected mayor. He goes to see Charles. He goes by tube with Guido, and they kind of astonishingly, you thought the mayor of London would know his way around London, but they get on the wrong tube at the City Hall. The tube going out of town rather than into town.
Very Boris Johnson, that story.
And they, oh my God, get off the tube, get on the train, going back in the right direction. So they're a little bit, a tiny bit late for Charles, and I don't think Charles like the meeting with Boris and Charles doesn't go terribly, but I just don't think it goes terribly well either. But a short while later, Camilla says, "Oh, that Boris Johnson, he looks like great fun. Can we have him for tea?" So Camilla has Boris for tea, and this time Boris and Guido cycle over because they aren't taking any risks with the tube. And they arrive, and Camilla has heard they're coming by bike and is absolutely astonished and comes down to the bike sheds to make sure it's really true. And then she whisks Boris upstairs and they have tea. And he comes down about an hour later, and they've obviously had a great time. They got on really well. And Boris has enjoyed himself immensely. But they have also had a serious conversation, and it was to do with the fact that Boris wanted to set up these rape crisis centres around London. And as part of that conversation, Camilla tells him that when she was a schoolgirl, quite a young schoolgirl, she's on a train going into London, and some chap starts groping her. And Boris is absolutely all agog at this and says, "What do you do? What did you do?" And she says, "Well, I did what my mother taught me. I took my shoe off and I whacked him in the nuts with the heel." And it's a fantastic idea of this resourceful, strong schoolgirl Camilla. But I always think that in a way, the most significant thing is, so she deals with the guy in this way, but then when she gets to Paddington, she finds a man in uniform, tells them what's happened, and the bloke's arrested, which shows such kind of presence of mind and strength of character, and also kind of civic responsibility. She has this bloke, this groper, evil groper, dealt with. It was absolutely brilliant. As an old colleague of mine said, it's the best PR she's had for ages. Everyone loves them all for it. And she's...
Did her office comment when the story was headlines a few days ago?
What can I say? I spoke to the palace. That's all I can say.
All right.
But you would have heard possibly that her attitude is that she's never told the story herself in public because she doesn't want to draw attention to herself, perhaps doesn't want to kind of diminish the experiences of other people that she's campaigning on behalf who've suffered far worse. But maybe she thinks now that by letting it be discussed in public, by people showing there's no shame or stigma attached to being a victim of this sort of thing, it might make it easier for others to talk about it. And that would be positive.
Well, wow. Thank you so much. I've overstayed my welcome by 10 whole minutes. I really enjoyed that, Valentine. I wish you every success. You don't need my wishes. It's going to be a huge hit. But thank you for sharing me and drawing me into the conspiracy of the NDA. I rather enjoyed that.
Thank you very much, Phil. Really nice to talk to you.
Oh, you too, mate. Good luck. See you soon. Good old Valentine. What a lovely bloke. Really enjoy working with him. Really enjoy talking with him. Yeah, I'm so lucky. I get to have these conversations with people, and yeah, I get to sign exciting non-disclosure agreements and learn things that are going to become big stories in the weeks to follow. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this week. Thank you for joining me. I'm just about to jump in the car and drive to Buckingham, where I'll be talking at the We Have Ways Military Historical Festival, all about my book. Did I mention I've written a book? I think I did mention it a few times a little while ago. Yeah, so I'm still pushing that. And I actually started to do some research for what may be another book. I haven't got a commission yet, but I'm hopeful. Anyway, it fills in the time between podcasts and holidays. So yeah, that's it. What next? Oh, well, I'm not sure, actually. I think having had a good chunk of royal programming, I might go back to a bit of medieval history. Steve Tibble, who you may remember, came on to talk about the Scandalous Crusaders. He's got a new book, Assassins. I think that's the title. I haven't actually interviewed him yet, but I've got a couple of weeks. So I'll do that, and I think that'll be the next show. Who knows, though? Things are changing so much. If there are major developments in the Diana story, as I mentioned, I talk about that at length with Shauna at the moment. I think a video will be up about the same time this program is. I may change it. Who knows? But if not, it could be some medieval assassins. Whatever it is, it'll be interesting, and I will appreciate your company. And thanks for it once again. See you all soon. Bye. This has been a Podcast World production. If you want to contact me, write to team@podcastworld.org, placing Scandalmongers in the heading, or you can reach out via the social media links in the show's bio. And if you've enjoyed this episode and you want to support the show, please consider taking a few seconds to hit the donate button found just below this video. Many thanks, and see you next week.